So good afternoon and welcome everybody. My name's Susan Ritchie and I'm going to be your host today. I run a small organisation called MutualGain, which is set up to build the relationship and the conversations that happen in communities with the conversations that are going on in agencies, whether that's local government, policing, health or housing, any of those agencies. And we've been going for about just nearly 10 years now. And these Cuppas emerged with the start of lockdown because we were thinking one of the things we do, our specialism is facilitating hosting good quality community conversations. So we thought, what better time do you need to stay connected and have conversations with people and learn something new? Because we always learn something new from an alternative narrative that might be put forward. So we set up the Cuppas, and they've been a real success. So if you want to go and view any of them, you can find them on our website. Most of them have got recordings, so I'll put the link in the chat a bit later. But there's all sorts, from learning more about trains to learning about parts of London and different areas across the country, to other more professional conversations around systems thinking and things like that. So this Cuppa came out of a Cuppa that we held with Professor Donna Hall, who led the Wigan deal, and Angela asked if she'd come along to that, I asked Angela if she wouldn't mind doing a Cuppa from her perspective, because within MutualGain we know there's always a number of different perspectives on one particular issue, and it's nice to get alternative narratives just to see where we can learn, capture that learning and take it forward. So I don't know, Angela, it's the first time I've met Angela through this virtual Cuppa, so it's really nice to connect. I think I might be a fellow pirate too with you and many other people on this call. So I'm not going to talk very much today. I'm just going to guide you through. Most people have learned how to use Zoom over lockdown. But for those of you who don't know some of the more detailed bits, we are recording. So if you don't want to be recorded when you're talking, and you can take your video off. And if you want to change your name for recording purposes, then just go to participants, find your name and rename yourself. That will give you some anonymity if you want to say something which you think, I don't really want everybody to know I've said that. Otherwise, it is a Cuppa. There's no requirement on you except to sit back and enjoy listening to Angela. She's going to talk for about 15-20 minutes. And then it's up to you. So you can either put some questions in the chat or you can wait and ask your own question. I'm going to put you all on mute for now while Angela's talking, because it just makes it better for the background noise. But just feel free to take yourself off mute when Angela's finished and be able to ask her some questions. Equally, if you want to put your questions in the chat, I'll pick them up and ask Angela about those too. So that's it. You just need to know the chat function, how to anonymise yourself, and over to you, Angela.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me today. I'm pleased to be here, feeling a little bit nervous. So I want to have a conversation and a chat with people today about what I'm in favour of, and I'm in favour of self-organising neighbourhoods who know what they have, know what they need help with, and know what they want others to do for them. And I'd say that I've probably been in favour of them most of my life, as I can vividly remember feeling part of a community, feeling part of a neighbourhood. I played out with friends of all ages. I was taken care of by family and neighbours. I was told off by neighbours, and I was kept on the straight and narrow by neighbours. And I've always been driven by fairness too. Maybe that's because, as the eldest child in a family that placed less value on the female role, I always felt that life was a bit unfair. And this has meant that I've tended to take jobs that have fundamentally been about participation, rights and inclusion, social justice and seeking to invite people in. And I've always believed in and looked out for the good in people. I've recently read Humankind, A Hopeful History, and if anyone else has, then I believe more in the island of Atta than the Lord of the Flies. And interestingly, I blush too when I read, which I read in there tells me about my relationship with power you know, I really do care about what people think, and probably too much. And whilst my humility has helped with empathy and understanding, it's often meant that I've held back from speaking my truth. So today, this is therapy for me. So thank you for being part of my therapy session. And the story I tell is about Wigan, as that's where I live. It's where I'm from, and it's the place I love. Sometimes I love it in the same way that I love my irritating brother, but I love it and I have a strong sense of connection to it. But the story I tell isn't peculiar to Wigan at all. And it's taken some courage to, as I'm speaking about my truth, about what feels like a sacred cow, immune from question or criticism, the Wigan deal. And it's the same with the LIFE programme, the ideas that Hilary Cottam developed for working with families. I read the book and it didn't fully resonate with my experience. The really important bits for me were missing. And at the time when we were doing this work in Wigan, it was very difficult to be heard. And so this is my opportunity to provide another narrative so that it can sit alongside the dominant one. And I'm going to start with the LIFE programme, as that started before the deal. And I secured the secondment in the back end of 2010, and I started in early 2011. I've been working for Wigan Council for 3 years at this point as an area manager for an integrated locality team within children's services. And Wigan was well ahead of the game at this time. And all the listening that I'd done in the years preceding had led me to believe, like many people here today, I guess, that the system needed to change, and it often wasn't helpful to those it was intending to help. So when I saw the job advertised to manage an integrated team in the area that I'd grown up in, I wanted it, because here was my opportunity to influence system change. By 2010, I realised how naive I was, and I was ready to leave. It was impossible, it felt impossible to change the system. And I could really see the need for the deal as a system reform tool. Gosh, it was needed. The power games, the unwillingness to cooperate and work in partnership. It felt like a place where many people were just doing a job. And then along came LIFE. And I remember sitting at my desk in Hindley Town Hall and reading the job description and thinking, I've got to get that secondment. Someone's knitted a job for me. You know, because it was much about focusing on changing the mindset and skill sets of workers in the programme and the system. And I got it. I did get it. And there's friends on this call here today who were with me at the time. I think Jill might be around. I think Elaine might be around. And I'm not sure if Rachel got here because she's a social worker on duty today, but maybe she is. And I noticed in Hilary's book, she talks about Wigan as being the place that made life work, and she attributed that to the leadership of Lord Peter Smith and Donna Hall. And yeah, there is some truth in that. If it wasn't for Lord Peter Smith, I don't think we would have kept the funding for as long as we did. First community budgets and then invest to save. It was a double-edged sword though, because it wasn't commissioned through the traditional route. So there was lots of opposition from people within the system. It was seen as a pet project. And Joyce Redfern, who was the chief CEO at the time, who brought life to Wigan with Lord Peter Smith, did come to see us a couple of times. And Hilary talks about Peter sitting, listening to families. I have more vivid memories of him playing rounders on the field with families. That was a sight to see. And I noticed that I felt a little jarred when I read in the book that the success was due to leadership, as it didn't feel like that at the time. It felt like we were on our own. In the early days, we were protected by our manager, Elaine. She guarded us whilst we got on with it. And then she was made redundant and we were abandoned, a bit like the community we were based in, to be honest. It was hard work to keep it going. It was a real fight and it was exhausting. And given that I felt there was another story, I set about asking others who were involved at the time in Wigan about what it was that was special about the way we developed Hillary's ideas. And that's what I'd like to share with you. The house. It was 2 semis knocked together. And it wasn't just any house, it was our house. And it had an open door and a cupboard full of tea bags, biscuits and bread for toast. And we invited families to help create the house they wanted it to be. And our invitation in was always about asking people for a favour first. Weeding the garden, painting the hall, cleaning the kitchen in return for a brew and a bacon and egg butter. We didn't have many vegans on Wesley Hall. And we're starting off with people feeling useful rather than useless. We tried to run it as a home, and that's what families noticed. You lot are like a family. It always feels calm here. We wanted people to feel like they were going into the grandma's, or the favourite auntie or uncle, or somewhere that it felt special to them. And we were very aware of power dynamics. We knew we had the power and we tried to share it. I was speaking with Rachel recently, who was the person from Participle who supported us and visited us. And she told me a story about a time that I'd forgotten when she came to visit the project with another colleague. And as usual, as she came through the door, somebody offered her tea and toast. And it took the colleague a few hours to realise that it was a family member rather than a paid member of staff who had kind of done the tea and toasting. And in fact, when she left Participle, Tony, one of their team members, gifted her a coat rack from the house, which she treasured as it reminded her of the house and the way it made her feel and what she saw there. Now, Rachel supported all the live programmes around the country. And so I asked her too, what was it about Wigan that was different? Why did it work here and not elsewhere? And aside from this place, the house, Rachel felt that we were the only team that truly sought to step outside of our traditional roles and be human. And I believe that's what made it different from a traditional multidisciplinary team. We were people first with expertise on tap, should it be needed. We were invited to take off our mask and be human, which was very scary for team members initially, and particularly for those who joined us from uniformed services. And that's how families started to use us. They might have a team member who had been seconded from housing, supporting them, but they'd come and have a chat with the nurse if they wanted to talk specifically about health, or the police officer about crime, or the recovery worker around substance or alcohol. We didn't send professionals in, they sought us out. And I remember one family member saying, this is just brilliant. Everything we need in one place and in a friendly place too, where you know and trust people. And we were guided by these kind of 7 fundamentals, and we had them on a big poster on the wall. And we talked about them during the invitation stage. And families particularly like the idea of being loving. It had a totally different reception though at the steering group that I reported to. I remember in the early days almost being attacked by someone from health about being loving and how it blurred boundaries and encouraged collusion, and we wouldn't have our eyes open to safeguarding. And team members from uniform services found it difficult too. It was definitely Marmite, you know, definitely Marmite. And in fact, Participle bowed to the pressure and changed the be loving fundamental to caring. But we chose to carry on loving in Wigan. And we tried our very best not to other family members. We were the being the change, we were on the programme too. We didn't use any tools with anybody that we hadn't used on ourselves, and that was part of the induction into the programme. And we were blessed really, because we had a day a week from the Tavistock and Portman. We had Gabrielle, who helped us to understand families. And she introduced us to Selma Freyberg's Ghosts in the Nursery and Angels in the Nursery to help us frame our relationships and work. And we also had access to a systemic family therapist who helped us through supervision to explore the impact of the work on our lives and our lives on the work too. He also supervised some of the direct work that team members did alongside family members, and he occasionally did some direct work with families too. And that seemed to work really well, rather than expecting someone to build a new relationship with another service. Of course, there was resistance to this from other professionals who felt their training was being devalued. Danny also helped us to put a frame around what we were doing, not because we wanted to, because we were quite happy exploring, but to help others, particularly the commissioners, understand it. And he found a model called collaborative helping, which combined appreciative inquiry, motivational interviewing, narrative practice and signs of safety, although we didn't formally use the latter. So we had lots of support, and I feel I sorted out a lot of my own personal stuff during this time. And it seemed only right that we offered that to family members too. We didn't want family members to see team members as counsellors, and so we aligned a person-centred counsellor to the team, so that if any family members did feel like they wanted to talk with someone, then we could speedily access service in the same way that when I had a miscarriage at the council, I had counselling the next day through, you know, the service that was offered to employees. And we also tried our very, very best to communicate to families that, like us, they were entitled to a private life, and they didn't need to tell everyone that they met their story. And families have been accustomed to do that in order to get any help. And we noticed that the way of working led to families inviting other families or bringing them to the door for support. And that really felt like a recommendation. So there was something about the way of working, and there was also something about the how of working too. There was a clear phase in the programme known as the invitation, where we got to know each other and we decided if we wanted to work together. And in line with the open invitation, it lasted as long as it needed to. Some families who felt really scared of secrets being revealed that may lead to their children being taken away took longer to invite in. And we didn't give up though, and we didn't label. We just let people know that the door was open if they wanted to join in. And during the invitation period, we took time to discover what families enjoyed, what they liked to do together, and then we helped to facilitate this. So we had like a poetry session at the house for one family, trip to the beach for another, swimming trips for parents who had too many children under the age of 8 to be able to do that by themselves. The most often it was pizza making sessions at the house. And we did something always to mark the arrival into the programme and to review, to celebrate. We built in and planned in celebrations to review. We talked about exit at the beginning too, so that people knew that when they decided to fire us off, that they would always be welcome for a brew for as long as we were around in the community. And we learned about each other and built trust. And all the team members involved felt like this was what they'd been trained to do. It reminded them of old school community work, old school housing work, nursing, police work, social work. And they'd ask, when did we stop doing stuff like this? When did we forget about the importance of the relationship in order to build trust? It was old school with a multidisciplinary edition. And the approach was built on capabilities, looking at the skills and knowledge required for the particular tasks. Although I feel we probably interpreted that locally as a capacity approach, going at the speed of trust and starting from where people are at. And it's here where we notice the limitations of the approach and that possibly the key ingredient and foundations were missing. The fourth capability talked about living within the community, and we viewed it as being part of the community. We could see that there was a much wider need for community building and inviting in, and we tried to do our best with the resource that we had. So very differently from other life programmes, we extended the invitation to join the programme to wider family members, anyone who the family wanted to be involved, like grandmas, granddads, brothers, sisters, friends. Sometimes we suggested, but anyone who they felt was right to become part of it. And we developed peer groups too, for young people, women and men. We had women with experience of domestic abuse supporting others. And we had some resistance to this from the system. We felt that we shouldn't be encouraging some groupings of families to be together, which was a little amusing, seeing that they lived around the corner from each other. And that as a system, when we clocked off at 5 p.m, they normally met up at the local shops. And it's here that we learned that we can be as relational and therapeutic as a service as we like, but it's a house without foundations, without community building. And so we were here, seeking to work alongside families to create something together that may work better than the system that they had been stuck within, often for generations. And along came the deal machine. And I don't think I'd ever felt a greater sense of incongruence. Here we were, co-creating in the community, supporting people to develop social contracts with each other. And then, ta-da, the deal arrives. It had been written for us by someone from the PR team and someone from strategy and transformation. And I remember sitting feeling pretty shell-shocked in an engagement session that I had to attend. I was just hearing our part and your part, and I wondered where the we was and where the together was. And it really seemed to have been put together according to what we measured rather than what we treasured. So you can find education in it, but you can't find play. And it felt like being a bit at school. I remember feeling really disappointed, as this was a real opportunity to create a bottom-up social contract with citizens, and instead it was a behaviour change contract. I see the deal as a system reform tool, which was absolutely needed, and it was delivered with great courage and bravery, but it isn't a social contract. And they didn't feel like there was a choice either as an employee. You were either a vampire, a sleepwalker, or a cheerleader. You was asked to pick where you stood. And there was a commitment that the vampires were going to be dealt with. And I noticed that there didn't seem to be a role for a participant either. There was nothing between sleepwalker and cheerleader. And it was from the cheerleaders that the spark plugs, as they were called, the people who would drive the deal, were chosen. So if you've ever watched the Blobs and Squares co-production film, you'll know that the spark plugs all spoke the same language. But seriously though, as a middle manager, it evoked fear. As alongside the deal and the new way of working were cuts, and people were scared. They had families to look after and bills to pay, and so employees began to learn the deal language ready for interview. They completed the employee satisfaction survey with that in mind, and I remember people expressing worries about the coding on the form. Council employees shared their worries of being monitored with me, and that's what happens when you do two people whilst cutting jobs. They comply rather than believe. I think that one department that took the essence of it and made it their own is adult social care. And as a service reform tool, its achievements are there to see. you know, people like Joe Wilmot and Catherine Anton in adult social care did some fantastic work, and that, you know, really needs holding up. But as I watched it evolve, there was other things that I noticed too. It seemed to me that belief in the deal grew according to pay grade. Middle managers would say they were playing the deal game, and then they'd become a senior manager and have a whole new philosophy. And I do a lot of chatting with people in my town. Since I left the council in 2016, I've been keeping a deal listening ear, intentionally asking people about it. I know a lot of our town's refuse collectors and quite a few of our school crossing patrol team. And when I chat with them, they tell me that they haven't got a clue. It just goes over their heads. They say they have to go to some sessions and listen to some statistics, and they really don't know why. And these are our citizens who are naturally doing it every day, who are naturally connecting and looking after people in the community in which they live and work. And I don't think they either are afforded the 2 days off to volunteer in your own community that other council employees receive as part of the contract. And during the pandemic, I've been reconnecting with lots of Wigan friends who've been around for much longer than the deal. People who were in Wigan when Steve Jones was our chief exec. And someone recounted to me how it felt like our council had turned into an episode of The Apprentice. And it certainly felt like that. Lots of Jimmy Choo shoes and pids and pods and whatever else we call it turned up and tried to change who we were, ignoring our history, it felt like to me, and replacing it with a do-to brand. We became a brand. And you'll find a good few cheerleaders, I expect, who might disagree, but I challenge you to find one who doesn't work for, who isn't funded by the deal brand. And what our new change makers missed is that much of what they hoped for was already in community. It was the system that needed reform, not the citizens. And so for me, the final straw was the imposition of behaviours for employees and citizens alike, for anyone who came into contact with them. And the language of that, you know, clear expectations and behaviours for all providers aligned to the deal to ensure commission services exhibit the behaviours we want. And the choice, you know, I would have much preferred us to see how we explored values together. These behaviours, be positive, be accountable, be courageous, felt really underpinned by behaviour change. And also I could tell you what more stories too about how, you know, be positive as for many funded groups stop them from being able to say what they really think or feel. And I'm sure it wasn't intended in that way, but that's what happened. And then there's the lesser known stories of the King's Fund focus groups, which for me align much more closely with my understanding about how Wigan citizens feel about the deal. And they asked the question, was the deal real? And I think they did 4 focus groups with people selected through, really independently selected. And this reflects kind of what I hear in the community, communities in which I am present within. People didn't really know what it is, and people associate it with recycling, and that's because at the beginning there was a great push on recycling because the council could bring lots of money in about it. When they were shown our part and your part, people felt that we were already doing it, and that the council should be doing their part anyway without it being conditional on what residents do. People felt it was a bit preachy. And wondered whether it was right to expect that everybody could meet these areas. People didn't feel that the council had kept the part in keeping council tax law, mainly because people didn't understand about the adult social care precept and the mayoral stuff of the police and crime. And despite some of the concerns, it said people did think that people should be doing the bits, you know, and of course that was a common theme because it's something we've always done in Wigan. We've always looked out for each other and we've always helped each other out. So that's intrinsic to who we are. And then there was the idea too that public satisfaction in services has improved. And this was definitely the case between 2013 to 2016. But there's no data available for the last 4 years. And it wasn't available for the King's Fund report. And focus groups told us that people felt that services have deteriorated over the last 10 years. And that's what I hear when I listen. And I've talked enough really about what I felt was incongruent about the work. And really I should be talking about what I would have liked to have seen or see happen. And personally, I think it's time to wind down the brand, that is the deal, and create social contracts on the back of what we've seen during the pandemic. It feels really old-fashioned now to me. I've always found it difficult to watch the branding of what's intrinsic to the nature of the majority of people in my town. But watching the way the brand has operated during the pandemic has led me to feel that it really has to stop. I mean, there was one particular example here when a senior manager was involved in developing prescriptions and the like to local people. And our council thought it was appropriate to publish photos on Twitter at people's doorsteps and give them a piece of paper with thank you to hold up. No, feels like people have become a little bit too big for the boots to me and lost the wear and have been consumed by a brand. As an internal system, it needs to continue, but we do need to stop pretending it's a social contract. It's time for a deeper democracy in my town. I see rising division for a long time. I see more people than ever are ending their life. 45 people last year in my town. We haven't had those figures for many, many years. There are greater incidents of domestic abuse and we've never ever got our head around it in Wigan. And we don't tackle it by creating more pathways and services. And it feels to me like local democracy has been shrunk and almost silenced with its own set of deal behaviours for councils, maybe intentionally in order to drive the cuts through. The calling procedure was changed. We have the highest number of petitions required across the whole of Greater Manchester in order to petition a decision. And it feels like approximately 20 people are making nearly all the decisions. And I'm calling for an investment in authentic community building, a redirection of resource based on our learning from the pandemic. And my tips to people who are kind of looking at taking a lot of what was really successful about the deal. You know, my tips are to start with what's strong rather than what's wrong. See the strengths, gifts and capacities of people. Be honest from the beginning. Our elected members asked our senior management team not to call the cuts savings and they chose to ignore that. And I think it's led to much of the division. Respect the intelligence of citizens and avoid reframing or only telling the good news story. Listen to your elected members, they're often closest to the community. Listen to citizens, invite in and don't silence those you don't agree with. Keep an eye on your constitution and remember what that's all about. Avoid central branding. Let it develop organically rather than force it on people. Remember to keep hold of both blobs and squares. You need both. And be careful if you decide to sell what you've created, which is kind of the plan, what the plan has been in Wigan if you look at the scrutiny committee reports. It means it has to work at all costs when you start to selling it. and you have to kind of cheerlead a story that citizens don't buy into, and they stop trusting you when you start sweeping or hiding the story. It's much more difficult in my town to find statistics. You used to be able to see them every 8 weeks at a scrutiny committee. They're now 6 months and sometimes like 9 months in arrears. It's difficult to find information. And keep an eye on power and ego. Lead from the back, not via the placard. And whatever happened to the live programme, you know, where did it go? This is kind of my view. We had a change in leadership and they wanted to put their own mark on things. They liked pause. There was no one left to hold up the mirror of uncomfortable truth. So the allies that we had were made redundant. They took the house off us and gave it to a new pet project funded via the Innovations Fund. They turned us into the Confident Families team and gave us Troubled Families target. They didn't understand the approach, particularly the strengths focus and the use of MI. They were concerned that if we didn't tell families everything that we thought was wrong with them when we first met them, then, you know, we weren't covering our backs if something happened later down the line. And they reduced the time available to work with people. They wanted a 12-week turnaround where we could stay open-ended in the beginning. And so I left. And I just want to finish by saying that this story isn't peculiar to Wigan. It's everywhere on a repeating cycle. We've been stuck in this cycle all my adult life. Leaders come and leaders go. New teams, new ideas. Sometimes people base decisions on career goals and reputational management rather than what's right for citizens. And the only thing that remains constant over time are the citizens and the people who live there. And that's why I'm in favour of self-organising neighbourhoods who know what they have, know what they need help with, and know what they want others to do for them.
Angela, thank you very much for that. I hope you found it therapeutic. So for those of you that joined the call slightly later, Angela declared this was a bit of therapy for her, to give an alternative narrative to something. And I think, you know, those alternative narratives, multiple narratives on any given situation are really, really important to capture. So I want to open it up to the group to see if there's any sort of key pertinent questions you'd like to ask Angela. What we've got in the chat at the moment, Angela, is a bit about, yes, we know, you know, someone was talking about Sure Start feeling similar. Loads, I mean, we could go on, couldn't we, of the numerous projects that we've all been involved in some shape or form over the years that have intended to do good work, but, you know, been and gone. So for those of you that have been involved in those programmes, whether it be in Wigan or elsewhere in the country, whether it be as a professional or a citizen, have you got anything that you would like to ask? And while they're thinking about that, I wanted to just sort of take a liberty really while they're thinking of just saying to you, I hear all the time, Angela, and something came up in the chat about this, about leadership, and people saying, oh, you know, it's about leadership. And you spoke there saying that you found that gave you a bit of a rub, really, because it wasn't really about leadership. You know, there was stuff going on out there that had sort of almost nothing to do with the leadership, that was good work. And I find myself arguing with people regularly to say it's not all about leadership at the top, it's not about the power at the top, but actually we need to focus more on the leadership that's in communities and across communities. I just wondered if you wanted to share any additional thoughts about that. I mean, I think your presentation sort of captured all of that, where your passion is, but I just wondered if there were any other things you wanted to say about that leadership role. Meanwhile, if anyone wants to tap into any questions into the chat, and or put your hand up. So if you go to participants, you should see a blue hand, and if you put your hand up, I'll be able to see that you want to talk, or put it in the chat. Either way, I can find you.
I think I feel a little hopeful actually for my town of Wigan, because we have open dialogue with our new CEO, and having been involved in the Deepening Democracy project with Simon Duffy and at the Centre for Welfare Reform, I think we're going to start opening a bit of a discourse around that, you know, and linking that possibly to community wealth building and how we are able to keep some of the wealth that is extracted out of our communities back in community. But I think it's at the very, very kind of early days, and I think there might be some kind of, you know, some power stuff, you know, because it's a new world. But I do feel that, you know, now's the time really. Now is the time in my town, because I'm quite worried about what I see in my town, and I am working on researching another question around, did austerity in the deal dismantle democracy and increase division? But I'm nowhere near kind of in any position to talk more about that. You know, I'm just researching it, but I'm interested in that. I'm interested in whether the way that we frame the cuts in Wigan led to people blaming local politicians, and whether that increased. You know, we've got Facebook groups in our town. Like some of them are like, I've got 16,000 people in, with a lot of hate and a lot of division in, and I think we've ignored that for way too long, and that's where I would like to see some kind of deepening democracy stuff going on in Wigan.
Excellent. Ruth, do you want to take yourself off mute, because Ruth wants to ask you a question around scale and branding?
Oh, thank you. I thought that by typing it in, I wouldn't actually have to speak. So
okay, sorry.
I'm embarrassed. Yeah, it's really about scale. You know, like the branding issue, the selling issue, the making something a success so we can't talk about what might be wrong within it or how we can do it better. Do you think there's just an intrinsic kind of resistance to say that things do need to be small, and that's a good thing, and they can be just what they are?
I think we might be moving. I'm very hopeful that we're moving to a different time where we're a little bit more honest. I think with, you know, kind of what I noticed when we were doing the live programme, one of the things that we were pretty good at, because it brought the system all together, was being able to kind of uncover sexual abuse in ways that other services couldn't see that. But nobody really wanted the cost of that on their watch as a director at the time, you know. So I think we've kind of, I think we need some real brave leaders who, in my view, who are prepared to kind of let the stats go rubbish.
We've got a question here from James Moore, who's saying that the shift from electoral democracy towards participative citizen-led democracy through action is perhaps being countered by elected and paid officials pushing back. And if there is pushback, then why do you think there is that pushback?
May I speak on that? I apologise. I was just responding to a really thoughtful take from Mr. Mike Chitty on some of the things that Angela was talking about. But as you've sort of brought me in, I really would like to just maybe push on that a little bit with Angela, because I really admire her work and follow her on Twitter and have learned from her every time I've seen her. And I guess I would love... So one of the things I'm going to be a little bit selfish, and I'm going to ask Angela a question about social prescribing.
Wow.
I'm going to ask you, do you think there's going to be a way of making social prescribing work in Wigan?
Well, I think Wigan kind of went for more of a community connector model rather than social prescribing. So I think there was a kind of a deeper understanding. There's some really, really good stuff in my time. You know, there is lots to be proud of here. Nationally, I think it might be a different matter. You know, and I think social prescribing works well where it's based on good community development. But definitely the work that I've been involved in Netherton, in the other area, what the community's been doing there, that is social prescribing, and the challenge is how do we get the cash from the commissioners redirected into the community. And I think that's kind of one of the conversations we're going to be pursuing in Sefton over the next few months. That's definitely something that we're going to be working towards.
Thank you.
We've got something here about, there's lots of conversation going on in the chat. So what I would say to you, for those of you who want to hold on to that conversation, if you're not that familiar with Zoom, at the bottom of the chat, you'll see 3 dots and it enables you to save the chat. So there's some links in there and some comments that you might want to hold on to as well at the end of this cuppa. But any other questions there? While people are thinking about those questions, you started the session saying that you were doing the life work. It came on the back of you thinking it felt impossible to change the system, and then along came life and it had kind of knitted a job for you there. But then you did say you thought there were some bits that didn't resonate so well with you, and I wondered what those bits were, or whether that was bits of what you came on to do, or whether it was bits of life that didn't.
Yeah, it was bits that I read in Radical Help. I read the Radical Help book, and it was the description of what happened in Wigan that I kind of didn't clearly identify with. It didn't feel like the story that I knew. So that was more about what didn't resonate with me.
Okay, come on guys, ask your questions. It's not often you get someone as knowledgeable and experienced as Angela. I'll just go through my notes and ask you a few. Here's a question from Naomi. Great. What are your thoughts on digital exclusion? In some ways, the investment for local authorities in digital by default seem to have not been as invested in communities without decent access, plus libraries less and less open. What's your thoughts on digital inclusion / exclusion?
Well, you know, if I look at, in fact, I'll just show you a photograph of it because I have got one here. If I look at, this was kind of the estate that we kind of worked on, and this was when Deal in Action turned up on the estate, and that there on the left was the old housing office. And it was the place where the community could go into, and it had a free phone and they could get support. But it had shut down by the time Deal in Action started. So they just put some nice placards on the windows, and then all the professionals turned up in the streets for a week, and then they left. And then 2 weeks later, they closed down the youth centre on the right-hand side, which traditionally had been a family centre. So there is nowhere for people to be able to access the digital stuff that you are talking about, Naomi, in communities like there used to be. You know, and there's many stories of children having to have completed homework over, you know, whilst being away from school on mobile phones without that. So, you know, it's really unequal, isn't it? And it's kind of, I don't know what else to say about that.
Okay, so now there's a couple of questions coming in now. Good, you're on a roll. Do you think part of the problem is a desire from leaders / decision makers to lift and shift a seemingly successful set of ideas from elsewhere? It strikes me that trying to generalise an approach too much is part of the problem, and that rather we need to make space for unique stuff to happen. And that question comes from Chris Hewitt. Any thoughts on that?
Definitely. Sometimes, like, you can read a Parks and Leisure strategy for Knowlesley, and then you read Wigan's, and it's exactly the same, you know. And I don't think we have ever kind of realised the skills and the gifts and the capabilities that we've got within communities to do our own. Yeah, I think that is a problem.
Claire's asking, are communities continuously engaged and listened to, and is the deal continuously revised?
Well, I don't work there anymore, but if I can just kind of talk about it as a citizen. When I did work there was a pretty good participation team, and there was a really good play team too that did quite a lot of participation work prior to the cuts. And we also had an equalities team who were quite proactive, and there were area forums and area councils, and there was have you said, there was lots of different ways. It weren't perfect, it never is, that people could get involved. And now we're in Wigan, we seem to be calling innovative a yellow coach that goes to shopping centres for an hour and talks to people and listens for what it wants to hear, and then writes it in as a innovative kind of engagement approach, and says that 6,400 people have shaped the deal 2030. And then on top of that, the only other mechanism that we have now is a survey. So at the minute there's a COVID-19 survey, and if you look at it, the questions are just like, do you think we should take over the buses? The real, it's a bit like when we first started the cuts and they asked us, do you prefer 3-week bin delivery or school crossing patrol people who will save children's lives? And that's how it was like kind of given to us. So I would say they've forgotten the way in Wigan.
I'd like to ask Andy Russell if you could take yourself off mute, Andy, because Andy wants to ask you a question.
Yeah, I should be off mute now. Is that right?
Yep, that's good.
Great. So just as a thank you, first of all, to Angela. So I'm from Wigan. I'm from Bryn originally, but I've lived in London for 15 years or so, and sort of worked around the country in lots of different projects. But first of all, I just want to say it's been really heartening to what you said about sort of a crossing guard not really caring that much about the strategy set out by a chief exec, even though they're the people on the front line delivering on that strategy. That resonates really well. And what I've taken from this conversation is that there's a lot of people who are sort of feeling a bit of that top level strategy fatigue, and sort of thanks for just saying that you've had enough of it, to be honest, and sort of walking away and doing something else. And I know Naomi, well, I should say thanks to Steph from People's Powerhouse for mentioning this on the Tortoise event yesterday. So that I think there's a fair few people who've attended from that. And Naomi's already someone in this chat who we've agreed to have a conversation because we're like-minded about this. So Angela, I want to try and have a conversation with you soon. So because I'm working on a project from not a new model, not a new initiative, but it's sort of a different way of doing things from Norway, where yes, there's a digital platform, and yes, there's a bit of consultancy, but it's completely neutral, and all that allows for people to do is connect locally, work together locally, and then build something from that. And it's completely from the bottom up, and that's what's exciting to me. So it's a cheeky question of, Angela, can we catch up, and maybe you can tell me why this isn't, because all I'm doing at the moment is seeing if this would work in the UK, then Norway's a different country in a different context. So yes, can we catch up? And then second, thanks to everyone who's sort of taking this similar approach. I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, Andy. Yeah, just get in touch.
Great, we've got 3 minutes left. There's a question from Ruth earlier on, what would be your call to action from all of us, or from the people in Wigan? There's another question from Claire around how all the engagement findings are pulled together. And another question there about what methods were used to involve the community in that. Anne Ruth's got her hand up. So if I can leave you with those questions for a minute, although she put her hand down now, so maybe I've asked the right question for you. Okay, Angela, any of those three or all of them in 3 minutes?
Sorry, I wasn't listening because I was reading Chris Whitehead's question, are there any positives from the deal? And I think, you know, kind of that needs to be acknowledged. There's a lot of positives from the deal. You know, the kind of, as a service reform tool, you know, there's been a real effort of kind of shifting some resource over to the voluntary and community sector. And there is a lot more community activity than there ever has been. And there is an awful lot of things to celebrate. My bugbear is just it's not a social contract, it's the behaviour change tool and the way that it was developed. So I won't want people to think that I don't love my town, you know, and I don't think people have done some great stuff. I just felt that there was a story that wasn't out there in the public domain that needed to be, because it, you know, the dominant narrative was saying too much for me. And what was another one, if you want me to just quickly...
There was one was around engagement findings and methods that we used, and the other was around call to action. Andrew's got her hand up and we've got 1 minute left. So I'll give you an opportunity to answer those two questions first, if you want to. The call to action, I'm wondering how people feel on this Cuppa. We quite often get another Cuppa emerge from a virtual Cuppa, and I'm wondering if that might be a good topic for a future Cuppa. What is our call to action in these current times for re-engaging or rebuilding a new social contract? So
yeah, I think Simon Duffy could probably talk to that with the work at Centre for Welfare Reform, and that's part of the strategy, really, isn't it? If he's still around on the call. You hear Simon? No, I think
I can get back to him and tell him he's been nominated if he's gone.
Yeah, because that's the work he's kind of pulling together. I don't know if anybody's seen the deepening democracy work that Compass and Centre for Welfare Reform have been kind of pulling together. That's there.
So on that note then, I'll take that as a kind of, that's a big question, what's your call to action for, to move forward? We'll try and host another Cuppa. So we are at 4 o'clock. There's more questions that have come up in the chat. So save your chat, bring those questions with you to the Cuppa on call to action, and we'll see if we can get more of those answers and have a bigger, fuller conversation. So on that note, I just want to say, Angela, a huge thank you to you for offering to host this Cuppa. It is a brave thing to do, to talk out and provide another narrative to something which has got lots of successes around it, but hasn't been particularly perfect. Nothing is perfect, is it? So to provide that other narrative is really, really great and brave sometimes. So thank you for that. I hope you'll join the others and bring your experience.
I have a really good concealer on, so I've not blushed too much, I don't think.
No, you didn't blush at all. It was great. And thank you everybody else, the other 40 odd people that joined the call today, all like-minded people, I think. So it'd be good to connect with you all and stay in touch as we move forward. So thanks ever so much. Have a lovely evening and a great weekend.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening.
I'm just going to let everybody go now. I'll just stop recording.